most of the emotional and psychological challenges we face in our lives, those debilitating, recurring issues of grief, anger, and fear, don't really belong to us. What if I told you they are often rooted in ancestral trauma, unresolved psychophysical conditions originating from our ancestors, which we have inherited? Many people are beginning to understand more than ever that we are the sum total of the influences from our past lineages. Since who we are is a result of relatives who survived and passed on their genetic coding, it makes sense that we not only inherit their DNA patterns, but also their emotional and mental structures as well. I began to delve more deeply into this recently after a shamanic clearing and the resulting 8 episodes I made called the Freedom Series. What happened for me is that I started to experience some deeply repressed emotional characteristics. These finally surfaced after a horrific nightmare where I woke up in terror. In the dream, I was confronted by a woman who was trapped in rage. I could feel the same kind of emotional triggering arising inside myself. When the situation began to escalate into violence, I chose to run. This pattern of escape from conflict and violence is quite familiar to me, and I recognize it as an adaptation within myself that comes from past core trauma. But what I recognize this time is it isn't just my past life trauma. It originated with ancestors who endured the same kinds of struggle. It was during this particular dream that I began to realize just how deep the shadow part of my self extended. And it goes back generations, way beyond just the few ancestors that I'm familiar with. I think each human being on this planet is part of an interlacing web of family struggles, survival traumas that are uniquely woven into who we are. And layered over those wounds is our ego, a facade, a personality structure that we build in order to help us cope and survive as best we can. It is a repeating emotional, psychophysical strategy that we develop in order to get through this particular disharmonic frequency known as 3D Earth life. Once this entire drama unfolded for me, I decided it was time to take a road trip to Gulf Shores, Alabama. It's the place where my late wife and I spent our honeymoon 24 years ago. I came here to connect with not only my ancestors, but hers as well, and to ask them to join me in a process of healing for both our family lineages. Leaving the Ozark Mountains and traveling 600 miles to the Gulf was a sobering journey. I spent most of the time in inner dialogue with past relatives, at least the few who came into my field of consciousness. I even met some delightful souls who walked into my life and talked with me on the beach. This happened while I was playing my ukulele. The forces of water and sun, wind and earth helped me bring clarity and healing to this process. I asked my ancestors if they wanted to be healed along with me, and I asked them to request help from the one infinite Creator. Interestingly, I began to remember about a year ago I was approached by my late father during a mushroom journey. Though he passed in 1985, I clearly sensed his presence when I was visiting in Florida. My dad revealed to me 3 things I did not know about him, which I was able to confirm later. And above him was a circle of male ancestors, all hovering above and looking down at me, saying in a unified voice, "You can accomplish for us something we never could." For the last year or so, I've puzzled about this encounter and questioned many times what in the world it could be that I could do. After the nightmare recently, I realized without a doubt that this was it. It has been given to me to release the emotional charge of fear and grief and rage, things that they all lived and suppressed in their own lives because they did not know how to do it. What I found out is just how deeply traumatic it had been for them. These traumas had been handed down generation after generation. It sort of reminds me of that passage in the Bible that says, "The sins of the fathers are visited upon the sons." I guess in the same way, this repeating karmic influence is like a continuous, unbroken chain of cause and effect. It remains intact until someone comes along and breaks the pattern. This pattern often stays energized each time we are triggered or react with what I call GAF: guilt, anger, and fear. This is what perpetuates the layers of psychological pain. And it's obvious how relationships inevitably cause these triggers to recur in our lives, thereby revealing the repressed shadow sides of ourselves. To me, this is ultimately what relationships are for, especially on a level of soul development. Yet it requires the right kind of balance and choosing for ourselves primary relationships that will foster nurturing, support, and compatibility. Because being with someone who is emotionally immature, needy, codependent, controlling or manipulative, dishonest, somebody who won't even admit when they're wrong or ever apologize, and who just blames you, that is a red flag. And it's best to distance ourselves from people like that. To do the ancestral work with a partner or with a friend is wonderful. But if we don't have anyone in our life, we still must do the work alone. Be aware of your triggers. Be aware of those annoyances and irritations that seem to arise when you least expect it. Then learn how to sit with these big feelings. Feel the charge in the moment. Look for where it is in your body and remain in a state of calmness. Learn to not react in the moment. Learn to sit still until the charge resolves itself naturally. In this way, situation by situation, we are releasing the karmic chains not only for ourselves, but for our ancestors and for those who will follow in our footsteps.
Since you went away, the days grow long, and soon I'll hear a winter song, but I'll miss you.